Right now, at any hardware store near you, there is something sitting on a shelf for less than $5. It is not a cleaning product. It is not a spray. It is not a subscription kit with a fancy label and a new formula. It is a piece of copper wire. And here is what the companies selling you $30 bottles of mold remover do not want you to figure out. That copper wire, placed near any surface exposed to moisture, will kill every single species of mold it contacts. Not slow it down, not temporarily suppress it, kill it, and stop it from ever coming back, permanently. Now, before you scroll away thinking this sounds like some folk remedy your grandmother used, let me give you the receipts. The United States Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, officially registered copper as the first and only solid surface material in recorded history to receive certified antimicrobial public health claims. They tested 275 different copper alloys using their most rigorous protocols. Every single one killed 99.9% of dangerous microorganisms within 2 hours of contact. 2 hours. Now here is what makes that number even more stunning. You know stainless steel? The material used in almost every modern hospital, commercial kitchen, and residential building today? The EPA tested that too. After 28 straight days of exposure, stainless steel killed nothing. 0%. Not a single organism. The material we've built our entire modern world around does less than nothing. And the material we've spent 2 generations moving away from? It eliminates the problem completely and keeps it eliminated. But here is the part that genuinely should make you stop and sit with this for a moment. This is not new science. This is not a recent discovery waiting on clinical approval. This is not some fringe theory being debated in academic journals. This knowledge is over 4,000 years old, and it has been slowly, deliberately, and systematically buried by an industry worth $2.2 billion, an industry that only survives as long as you never stop buying their products. This is the story of the most powerful natural antifungal substance on Earth, and it is the story of why you were never supposed to find out. Let's start with the scale of what we're actually dealing with. Right now, 45 million buildings across the United States have unhealthy levels of mold growing inside their walls. That figure comes directly from peer-reviewed research published in the journal Indoor Air by researchers Mudari and Fisk. These are not activists or bloggers. These are scientists publishing in academic literature. Those same researchers found that 21% of all asthma cases in America are directly caused by mold and dampness exposure inside the home, not seasonal allergies, not pollen counts, not temporary sensitivity, the kind of asthma that puts children in emergency rooms every year because of something growing silently inside the walls where they sleep. The CDC and the World Health Organization both confirm the same conclusion. Living in a building with mold measurably increases your risk of developing serious respiratory disease. So we have a public health crisis affecting tens of millions of people, backed by the CDC, the WHO, and independent peer-reviewed research. And the answer that the cleaning product industry has handed us is a plastic bottle that costs $12, needs to be reapplied every few weeks, and generates enough annual revenue to fund a small country. Here is what that industry has never told you. The real answer has been sitting inside the walls of any building that still has copper plumbing. The element itself has been quietly fighting mold and biological contamination your entire life, inside your pipes, and nobody ever told you it could do it everywhere else too. To understand why copper works, you need to go back to 1882. Picture the vineyards of Bordeaux, France. A fungal disease called downy mildew has been tearing through French grapevines since the 1870s. Entire harvests are being wiped out. The French wine industry, one of the most economically vital industries in the country, is collapsing. Growers are desperate. Scientists are scrambling. A French botanist named Pierre-Marie Alexis Millardet is walking through one of these devastated vineyards, studying the damage, when something stops him cold. The vines closest to the road are completely untouched. Every other plant in the field is infected, white fungal growth covering the leaves, stems dying, grapes rotting before they ripen. But the vines right along the road's edge? Green, lush, thriving, not a trace of disease. He starts asking questions. A vineyard manager named Ernest David explains what was different about those vines. They had been spraying them with a rough mixture of copper sulfate and lime, but not to fight the disease. They had no idea it would do that. They were spraying it to make the grapes look unappetizing, to discourage people walking past the road from stealing them. They were using copper to make the fruit look ugly. And without realizing it, they had been killing the most destructive fungal plague in French agricultural history. Millardet ran formal trials for 3 years at Château Ducasse. By 1885, he published his findings and presented what he called Bordeaux mixture to the world, the first fungicide ever deployed at commercial scale anywhere in human history. And then the ripple effects came. Bordeaux mixture didn't just rescue French wine, it was used to save Irish potato crops from blight. It saved banana plantations across Latin America. It protected orchards on every continent. A simple copper compound became arguably the most consequential agricultural discovery of the 19th century. 140 years later, it is still used in certified organic farming worldwide. But here is what gets quietly skipped in every agricultural history course. Millardet was not even close to being the first person to understand what copper does. The Egyptians were documenting copper's sterilization properties around 2400 BC in a medical text known as the Smith Papyrus. They used it to purify drinking water and treat infected wounds. 4,000 years ago, in ancient Greece, in Hippocrates, the man we named the physician's oath after, was prescribing copper-infused water for respiratory infections and digestive illness. Persian royalty carried water in copper vessels across desert journeys lasting weeks because they had observed something they could not yet explain scientifically. The water stayed pure. It did not make them sick. In India, Ayurvedic medicine has stored drinking water in copper vessels for millennia. That practice continues in millions of homes today, not out of tradition for its own sake, but because it keeps working. The Romans built their aqueducts with copper. Their ships had copper-lined hulls. Their surgeons used copper instruments. Every one of these civilizations, separated by geography, by language, and by thousands of miles, independently arrived at the same conclusion over thousands of years. Place copper near the microorganisms that cause disease, and those organisms die. The knowledge was universal. It was free. It required no patent, no brand, no monthly subscription. In 1893, a Swiss botanist named Carl Wilhelm von Nägeli gave this phenomenon its scientific name, the oligodynamic effect. It describes the ability of certain metal ions, copper in particular, to destroy living cells even in extraordinarily small concentrations. Not large doses, not concentrated solutions, trace amounts, invisible quantities, lethal. Here is how it works at the cellular level, and this part matters because it explains why copper is not just better than other solutions, it is categorically different. When moisture contacts copper, a little humidity, a drop of condensation, anything, copper ions are released into that moisture. Those ions carry a positive electrical charge, and they are immediately attracted to the negatively charged cell membranes of microorganisms like mold. The copper ions make contact with the membrane. They puncture it. They flood the interior of the cell. Once inside, they trigger the production of something called superoxide, a reactive oxygen species so chemically aggressive that it literally shreds the organism's DNA from the inside out. At the same time, the copper ions are disabling the enzymes the organism depends on for energy production and reproduction. The cell cannot repair the damage. It cannot replicate. It cannot survive. It dies. And here is the detail that separates copper from every other antimicrobial material on the planet, including silver, which is often held up as the gold standard of natural antimicrobials. Copper exists in 2 oxidation states. It continuously cycles between them, which means it is attacking microbial organisms through multiple biological pathways simultaneously. It doesn't use one mechanism. It uses an entire coordinated system of mechanisms at once. Silver only has one oxidation state, one pathway, which is why microorganisms can gradually develop resistance to silver treatments over time. Copper? The scientific literature has found essentially no evidence of organisms developing effective resistance to copper. Because it is not one weapon, it is a full arsenal hitting from every direction simultaneously. And here is the final detail that makes this genuinely astonishing. A copper surface does not run out. It does not expire. It does not need to be recharged, replaced, or topped up. Copper ions keep releasing as long as the copper exists. Documented copper roofing installations in Europe have been continuously preventing biological growth for more than 50 years, with zero maintenance. Zero. In the 1960s, NASA had a problem that could not be solved with anything that existed. They needed to purify drinking water aboard the Apollo spacecraft. Chlorine was the obvious choice. It was what everyone used to sterilize water. But in the sealed environment of a spacecraft, chlorine was too volatile, too chemically reactive, and flat-out dangerous. It could not be used. So NASA engineers at what would become Johnson Space Center developed something new. A device that used electronic ionization to release copper and silver ions directly into the water supply. No chemicals, no filters to replace, no monitoring systems, no weight penalty beyond a device the size of a cigarette pack. That 9-ounce device kept the entire water supply of the Apollo missions sterile for the duration of every mission. Let that sink in. The most extreme operational environment humans have ever worked in, a sealed capsule moving through the vacuum of space, was kept biologically safe using copper ions. NASA later licensed this technology for commercial use. Today, copper and silver ionization systems purify swimming pools, public fountains, dolphin habitats, and large industrial cooling towers around the world. And NASA proved that copper could replace an entire sector of chemical water treatment in conditions where failure was simply not an option. Almost no one knows this story. You do not need a laboratory to verify any of this. You just need to look at a roof. Find any roof with a copper cupola, a copper chimney cap, or a copper ridge vent. Look at the shingles directly below the copper component. Clean. No moss, no algae, no mold, no mildew. Now look at the shingles beside or above it. The same roof, same exposure to rain and humidity, covered in biological growth. Every time it rains, a microscopic amount of copper oxidizes, dissolves into the water, and washes across the shingles below. Those copper ions create an invisible antimicrobial field that prevents any biological organism from establishing itself on that surface. And roofers have known this for generations. It's why premium asphalt shingles now come with copper granules embedded directly into the surface, specifically to replicate this effect across the whole roof. And here is the practical application that the cleaning product industry prays you never calculate. A strip of copper flashing installed along the ridge of any roof will prevent all moss, mold, and algae growth on the entire slope below it, for the lifetime of the roof. Not the season. The lifetime. The cost? Between $5 and $15 at any hardware store. One installation, no reapplication, no chemicals, decades of complete protection. Now let's talk about why you've never heard any of this before. The global mold inhibitor and cleaning product market is valued at $2.2 billion in 2025. That figure comes from SNS Insider Market Research. The companies behind that number include names you recognize: Clorox, Procter & Gamble, Reckitt Benckiser, SC Johnson, and dozens of others. Every one of them sells mold and mildew products built around synthetic chemical compounds. Every one of those products costs somewhere between $8 and $40 per bottle. Every one of those products requires regular repurchase. That is not a coincidence. That is the business model. And now here is the fact that breaks that model completely. Copper cannot be patented. You cannot own the rights to an element on the periodic table. You cannot create a proprietary, brand-protected version of something that comes out of the ground. You cannot build a subscription revenue stream around a material that costs $5, lasts decades, and never needs to be replaced. The entire commercial mold-fighting industry depends, structurally, existentially, on you believing that only their branded chemistry can solve this problem, that professional solutions require professional products, that natural materials are unreliable folk medicine that modern science has surpassed. It is one of the most successful marketing campaigns in modern consumer history. $2.2 billion per year is the proof. So instead of the truth, you were directed to the spray aisle. You were told that science belongs in bottles with warning labels, not on your hardware shelf in a roll of wire. And for 2 generations, it worked. The most dramatic confirmation of all of this came not from a laboratory, but from an epidemic. In 1852, during the cholera outbreaks that were killing tens of thousands of people across Europe, a French physician named Victor Berck made a systematic observation. Workers in copper smelting plants, copper mines, and copper foundries were surviving at dramatically higher rates than the surrounding population, not slightly higher. Dramatically higher. Berck spent 15 years documenting this pattern. In 1867, he presented his findings to the French Academies of Science and Medicine. The conclusion was impossible to dismiss. Copper workers were surviving a plague that was decimating the cities around them, and their primary differentiating factor was sustained exposure to copper. Fast forward to the 21st century, hospitals began installing copper surfaces in intensive care units, copper door handles, bed rails, IV poles, tray tables. The results were published in peer-reviewed medical journals. Hospital-acquired infection rates dropped measurably on units with copper surfaces compared to identical units with standard stainless steel. MRSA, the antibiotic-resistant superbug that kills tens of thousands of people annually, was eliminated on copper surfaces within 75 minutes. On stainless steel, it survived indefinitely. The EPA registered it. NASA deployed it in space. Hospitals proved it in ICUs. Victor Berck documented it during a 19th-century plague. This is not a fringe claim. This is one of the most thoroughly confirmed phenomena in the history of applied science. Let's make this actionable because information without application is just interesting trivia. For indoor mold on surfaces, dissolve 1 teaspoon of copper sulfate into 1 gallon of warm water. Copper sulfate is available at any garden supply store for just a few dollars. Spray this solution directly onto any surface where mold or mildew has appeared. Let it sit for a full hour. This gives the copper ions time to penetrate the mold structure down to the root system. Wipe it clean and allow the surface to fully dry. The residual copper ions left on the surface create a chemically hostile environment for mold regrowth that persists for weeks. For outdoor surfaces, patios, decks, fences, concrete walkways, mix 1 to 2 ounces of copper sulfate per gallon of water and apply it with a garden sprayer to a dry surface. Let it soak into the material. Copper ions absorb into porous surfaces like wood and concrete and prevent biological colonization for months. 1 treatment, 1 afternoon, months of protection. For your roof, install a strip of copper flashing or copper mesh along the ridgeline, leaving 2 to 3 inches exposed to weather. Every rainfall will distribute copper ions down the slope below, creating a permanent biological barrier. 1 installation. Lifetime protection. The cost is between $5 and $15. For camping gear, tarps, and tents, wipe any fabric surface with a diluted copper sulfate solution before long-term storage. Mold and mildew require biological footholds to establish themselves, and copper removes every foothold available. These are not experimental protocols. They are applications of a mechanism that has been continuously validated across 4 millennia of human use and confirmed by modern regulatory science. The knowledge did not disappear because it stopped working. 4,000 years of use across every major civilization on Earth confirms it works. The Egyptians knew it in 2400 BC. The Greeks knew it. The Romans built their infrastructure around it. A French botanist rediscovered it in a vineyard in 1882 and saved entire agricultural industries. NASA relied on it in space when there was no room for error. The EPA certified it after the most rigorous testing protocol applied to any surface material in history. Hospital ICUs proved it against the most dangerous antibiotic-resistant infections we have ever encountered. This knowledge was not lost. It was buried. Buried beneath 2 generations of advertising. Buried beneath a $2.2 billion industry that depends, structurally, financially, completely, on you never making this connection. Your great-grandmother did not know the word oligodynamic. She could not have explained copper ion release or cellular membrane disruption, but she knew that the copper kettle never grew mold. She knew that the water from the copper pitcher stayed fresh for days longer than water stored anywhere else. She knew that the copper pipes in the basement never had the problems the newer plastic ones did. That knowledge passed through families for thousands of years at zero cost. Then, 2 generations of carefully funded marketing convinced an entire civilization that it was primitive, unreliable, and best left behind in favor of something that came in a branded plastic bottle. If this video opened something for you, if it shifted the way you think about what you've been sold versus what actually works, subscribe and share it with someone who deserves to know. Every share keeps alive what the industry spent billions to bury. Every person who finds this information is one less recurring customer for a system that was never built to solve your problem. It was built to maintain it.